from you are all things. To you are all things. You deserve the glory.
If you would, turn with me to James 4, and we're going to look at verse 1. We've been in a series in the book of James, and here we begin this passage in James 4. It says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says he yearns jealousy over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us, but he gives more grace? Let me read that again. He gives more grace. Therefore, it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you." If you would, pray with me. Dear Father, we look at this passage. It is full of so much from you. And so, Lord, I pray that you will use me to enlighten some of this truth so that people will understand it. Lord, I pray that we won't back away from what you have to say. And at the same time, Lord, I pray that it will be filled with the same love that you would want, Lord. I pray grace, but also truth to pour out of these words to people, because that's what you show us here in these passages. And so, Lord, I thank you for each one here. I pray for those that are here that maybe for the first time, and I pray for those that have been going to church for their entire lives, that this word will speak to each one of them as you want, Lord. I pray this in your Son's name, amen. A few years ago, my family was on our way to see extended family. It was my brother, and and his wife, and we were headed to San Diego, and we were leaving from Arizona, and we, after a long, hot drive in the desert, many of you know that, and you're just hoping, I just want to get to San Diego, I want to get over those mountains, and we got closer and closer, and we got off on a new app that I had, Waze. If you ever use Waze, you know it tells you where all the police are, it tells you where all the other things are, but I like the one that kind of tells you where the police are. Not that I ever would speed. I just like to know where our men and women are that are protecting us, right? And so I'm driving, and for whatever reason, the app stops working. But I'm from California. I know these hills. I really don't, but I thought I did, and I tried to make my way through the hills. And after a while, Jessica, my lovely wife, who always knows where she's going, says, "You don't know where you're going, do you?" And I said, "What makes you say that?" "Well, we've been kind of driving here for a long time. I mean, when are we going to get there?" And this is after, 6-7 hours. And you think, why would it take you 6 or 7 hours to get to San Diego? Mainly because we had 2 kids, right? And we stop about every 30 minutes is normal for us. And so you stop, you get something to eat and all that. So it's made it for a long trip. And we're starting to really kind of get on each other's nerves. Have you ever had that moment? Have you ever been on each other's nerves? Ruben, you would never have done that, right? You never get on each other's nerves. And no, we never do that, right? Ron, you're not even, not at all. So, we're starting to fight a little bit. And it gets worse. I mean, there's like an all-out fight going on. And we never, ever would, as somebody told me years ago, we would never, ever consider divorce. Death, yes, but never divorce. And so death came up a few times. It was just like we were on. And I'll tell you, if you want to make Jessica upset, get about 100 miles from where you need to be going and then get lost in the middle of the night with kids. And so we were at it. And then it was silent. And that's sometimes even worse than the arguing, just the silence. And everybody in the car knows that I don't know where I'm going. The Waze app is not working. It is very, very dark. And I call my brother and I say, hey, I think we're lost. You never say you're lost, right? You never say you're lost. I think we're lost. He said, explain where you are. And I explained what I saw, and he reassured me. This is what he said, these words which reassured me. He said, I have no clue where you are. And so I'm still driving. It's now about 1 a.m. We should have been there at 10:30. And he said, I'm trying to walk you through this. And then I lost him because we don't have signal coverage, and then came back. And finally he said, I think you're just going to have to go back to where you turned off and then go the right way. Now, I knew what the right way was, but I wanted to do a shortcut. Sometimes our shortcuts take us 2.5 hours, 2.5 years, sometimes decades off course in life. And our signal is lost. And that's what James is saying here. He's saying, you are in the midst of chaos. He's speaking to believers, Jewish Christians. He's like, you guys are fighting each other. You guys are at each other. Somewhere along the line, the signal has been lost and you are off course. And you got to get back to where you came from. If you want to get home, if you really want peace in your life, if you really want joy in your life, you're going to have to go back where you came from. And so today, if you have experienced conflict or you are experiencing conflict in life, here's what James is telling us. There is a way out of this mess. If you are experiencing conflict, and I would say in this world that we are living in, there's conflict everywhere. You turn on the news and you see conflict. I saw recently where North Korea is back to firing missiles into the ocean again. And so our ships are headed over to North Korea area. And then I heard where Russia is actually continuing to advance in Ukraine. And actually they had an election a couple of days ago. Russia had an election in Ukraine. I don't want to get into politics, but in that, I'm sure that's a nice, fair election, right? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on in the world, but we don't have to look at the world to see the chaos. We can look at our own country. There's chaos everywhere. We don't even have to look at our politicians, but sometimes we can look at our own city, and we can look in our own community. Now, recently, I heard even in our own district here in our community, teachers are experiencing really what we see at home over the last 2 years from COVID. The teachers are now experiencing it in the kids, and it's not the kids' fault. The kids are doing things and acting out things they see at home, and there's all kinds of stuff happening. Kids getting expelled, teachers being pushed, students getting threatened, like kids in elementary school saying, I'm going to kill you. I mean, we were seeing all that in our own community, just around here. In this area, we have people even in this room right now that are experiencing on a day-to-day basis in the educational system. And so we're seeing this upheaval. And so we can actually use this message to help all of us in all of our lives, not only in our community, but also in our own nation. But really, this is speaking to the church. If you really want to boil it down, James is speaking to the church, and he is saying that this fighting and this quarreling and this bickering is happening among you. As a new church, it's important to look at these passages and not look over it, because as a church, we can always, if we ever see this come up in our church, we can always go to somebody and say, hey, I don't know where you came from, but that's not how we do it here at Aspire. You may have come from a church that does that, and I've been a part of church my whole life, and there are churches where it's like part of life to have arguments all the time. That's not what we do. So we're able to go to somebody and say, hey, we don't talk about other people behind their back. We don't argue that way. This is not how we act. And so we're able to do that here at this church. But I think it's important to look at it, because as we grow up, what happens is we can get kind of high and mighty and think, you know what, that's past us. We let our guard down, and then before long, people are gossiping, and people are arguing, and people are quarreling, and marriages are breaking up, and I've seen it, and I just want to tell you guys as a new church that this happens, and it can happen even here. And so James, going back to one of the most powerful passages in the entire book, James 1:19, he says, "Hey, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger." Quick to listen. You see, what they were doing is they were quick to anger. They were quick to speaking. They were slow to listening, and here's this conflict and chaos that emerges. So the first thing that we see here in this passage is the cause of conflict. It says in verse 1 of chapter 4, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you?" These deep internal wars within families and marriages, and even what we see with school systems, even in our own country. When we see this, we see the fighting online, we see social media. We actually have social media that actually pits people together. Why? Because more people will be online if they can pit you one against the other. Did you know that? Did you know that when you get upset on Facebook, Facebook's just laughing? They love it when Republicans get angry at Democrats. You see, the more that you can fight online, the more ads they can run, the more they can control you. From Instagram to Facebook, they control you by that, and they pit each other against each other. But I want to look real personally here. I want to look at our lives and our marriages and our families, because I think if we can really help our families and our marriages and even us as individuals, we get to the heart of the problem. Because even in our individual lives, our lives are kind of like, in this passage, it's kind of like describing a volcano. When you look at the big picture of this and the way the Greek is formulated in this passage, it's almost like James is describing in the early verses a volcano that erupts. And this stuff is coming from something. You know, a volcano just doesn't all of a sudden erupt. There's something going on underneath. Did you know that? You're from Hawaii. Islands form from volcanoes, and those volcanoes, they have this lava that kind of erupts, and it's not a matter of if the volcano is going to erupt, it's a matter of when, right? And so it comes up. And in our lives, what happens is if something comes out and quarrels are happening, there is something that's happening from within. March 27, 1980, I was a young boy, not too old, and I remember a volcano erupted in our country. It was big news. I'd been to the actual Mount St. Helens before it erupted. We took a tour one time when I was younger, and we went to Mount Rainier and Mount Hood, and we went to Mount St. Helens, and I thought, wow. At first, I was kind of excited. I'm like, wow, a volcano might erupt. Now, the people in the area weren't excited at all. But if you live in Arizona, it's kind of exciting. But when it happened, it was bigger than I thought. It was surely bigger than what Washington thought. I mean, this erupted in such a way, it killed 57 people. It is the deadliest volcano to date in American mainland. And we saw ash everywhere. 540 million tons of ash fell on 22,000 square miles. Ash drifted all over the globe. They found ash only days later in Minnesota and Oklahoma from the Northwest. I mean, it spewed everywhere. So when volcanoes erupt, it just doesn't impact your little community. It impacts everywhere. So there are volcanoes going off everywhere relationally in our world. And that kind of volcano erupts. It impacts your family. It impacts your marriage. It impacts your churches. It impacts school systems. It impacts our country. And this volcano erupts. And James describes it. He says there's jealousy. There's coveting. He says there's murder. I don't believe he's talking about physical murder in this. I think he's talking about character assassination. He's getting to the heart of it, which Jesus does. Jesus talks about the heart of the matter and the fact that you don't have to commit adultery physically to commit adultery. It's in the heart. You don't have to murder physically to murder. It's in the heart. And so James is following this, Jesus, his half-brother, he's following this same thought that it comes from within. It ruins our fellowship with one another. It ruins our churches. It ruins our neighborhoods. And there's a result of this conflict. It says in verse 4, "Do you not know that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend with the world makes himself an enemy of God." So what happens is when this transpires in our lives, we actually go from being a friend with God, and we saw that, by the way, in James 2. We see that Abraham was a friend of God. We go from being a friend with God to a friend with the world. And anytime you go from being a friend with God to a friend with the world, that's not a good thing. And so James says you change your allegiance and you move and you're now enmity with God. You actually are separated from God. You are opposed to God. So there's this struggle that mounts. And it's easy to look at this passage and to think of people and to say, wow, I'm thinking about my ex-husband or my ex-wife, or I'm thinking about that teacher, or I'm thinking about that politician. Here's what I want to do. I want to stop for a moment, and I want us to look deep within ourselves and say, is there anything going on in our lives? Because the first place to look is right in the mirror. Right in the mirror, and to say, how am I doing? Would I say that I am a friend with God, or am I a friend with the world? I think all of us would say I'm a friend with God, but does our life look like, does our speech look like that? How we carry ourselves, would we say we are a friend of God? Or would we say we are a friend with this world system? And James is describing really this old life, this old person that used to be, and all of a sudden somehow you took a wrong turn, and now you have found yourself doing the same old things you used to do. Well, the third thing here is there's a cure for the conflict. I'm going to spend most of my time on the cure. This third point is the cure for conflict. So we know that there is a conflict that's going on. We know there's a cause to this conflict, but I want to talk about the cure, because we can talk all day about all the things that are wrong, but at the end of the day, here's the question that we all must have. What do I do about it? Yeah, I know. I look in the mirror and I say things and I do things I don't mean. Well, how do I stop it? And James says this, but he gives more grace. Grace. Don't you love grace? I just love the word. What does the word mean? Jerry Bridges says this: grace is God reaching downward to people who are in rebellion against him. So in the midst of this war, what happens is God looks at this war, and we all deserve to be separated from him forever. We all deserve hell. We all deserve it. To act the way that we act and to do the things we do. But God looks at this and he says the only way for them to get out of this is for me to come down there myself and to show them how to live and to die for those sins and to give them a new start. That's grace. And we can talk about all the illustrations of what grace looks like. But the greatest illustration is that God sent his only son to earth to die for us, to stretch out his arms and to give his life for us so that we can come back to him and be in a right relationship with him. That is the cure for any conflict. A couple of years ago, we saw on the news the racial divide in our country, which is a real thing. Racism does happen in our country, but I think the solution for racism, let's face it, we got off track a little bit as a country on that, didn't we? And we started thinking that it's this and this and this, and it's this social group, and it's this social action. The only solution for division is Jesus. The only solution for division in our country is Jesus. The only solution for racial divide is Jesus. The only solution for economic division is Jesus. The only thing that we must do is come to Jesus. That is the cure for this conflict, and that is really grace. Grace is God's unmerited favor and love on us on the cross. The greatest picture of that is Jesus. But also, the same grace that brought us to God in right relationship is the same grace that gets us through life. Let me say that again. The same grace that allows you to come back to God is the same grace that now allows you to get through day-to-day life. You see this in 2 Corinthians 12:9. It says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. His grace is sufficient. His grace is always there. Some of you today, you may feel like you've gone way, way too far, and you've done some things that are just so far from God that he'll never welcome you back. Now listen, if you've never thought that, congratulations. I have. There are times in my life where I think, how in the world would a holy God welcome me back? You ever done stuff like that? Have you ever done the same thing over and over again that you ask forgiveness for? And you're like, I got to go back and ask for forgiveness again. And you got to go back to the same God and say, God, what a wretched man I am. Paul says it in Romans 7. Romans 7 is full of honest statements from Paul saying, there's nothing good in me. What Paul's saying is there's a volcano within me. Apart from you, God, I am nothing. And I keep doing the same thing over and over again. But thanks be to God, he says in Romans 8. So here we see this grace that welcomes us back. And we see this in James 4:6. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Submit yourself, therefore, to God. Here's this word, submit. So how do we apply this cure to our lives? This word, submit. And, in our day and age, we don't like that word submit, but it is one of the most beautiful words in all of the Bible. Submit. Say, how in the world is that beautiful? People don't like that word, right? But it is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful word. Let me give you an example of submission. This umbrella, and those of you that are kind of like, that's bad luck to open an umbrella. I'm sorry. You can move your eyes away, okay? This little umbrella, I wish I had my big umbrella here, but this is the small umbrella. This umbrella is a picture of submission. It's protection. Like if you go out in a rainstorm and you got the umbrella, maybe not when it's monsoon, you'd lose your umbrella like this size, but you would be able to have covering, right? This umbrella represents being under the mission of God. Submission. To submit, it comes from the word submission. So there's a mission of God, and I submit, and I come underneath God. So when I submit, I actually am protected. So there's a wonderful protection that comes with submitting to God. And you say, well, how does that apply to my life? Well, when we talk about lordship, what we're saying is God is in control and I'm not. So when I come underneath this, what I'm saying is, God, whatever you say, I will do. And by doing that, I find protection, no matter where I go in life. I can be in America, I can go to another country, I can do that with my wife, and we submit to God. So when I'm underneath this umbrella, I'm submitting to God's standards. Does that make sense? So the Bible talks about submitting. He goes on and talks about submitting to government leaders. You say, well, that surely doesn't apply to America. Well, it was actually written during the Romans day, right? So you had Romans that were in charge. And yes, it does apply. You had to submit to those authorities. There was something about followers of God that would submit underneath the government authorities. And when you do that, I am simply relying upon God to get me through. That's what God does. It talks about submitting, employees submitting to their bosses in Scripture. It talks about kids submitting to their parents. There's actually a promise involved when you obey your parents. Did you know that? It's the only one where you live long when you obey your parents. So you obey your parents. So when we submit, when we yell and we talk poorly about our parents, we talk poorly to our parents. We live in a day and age where I've actually heard kids actually order their parents and tell their parents what they're going to do. I never would do that in my family, but they would actually do that. I wouldn't even be here if I did that in my family, And so what happens is when you do that, what happens is the umbrella is gone. It's not because God took it away, you moved. So when I choose to not listen to my parents and backtalk and do things, I'm actually over here. The Bible actually says in Ephesians 5 that wives submit to their husbands. Wives submit to the husband. It's not saying that you submit to a man that bullies you or abuses you. That's not what it says. It's talking about submitting and listening to the husband. Because when you do that, There's the covering. And it doesn't leave husbands just to go ahead and live how they want. It says that husbands, you are to lay down your life for your wives as Christ laid down his life for the church. So submission is huge. So this idea of submission is huge. And we really have a country that lives outside of submission. And so we wonder what's wrong with our country. Could you imagine this? Imagine this. This is crazy. A husband and a wife submitting to the husband, a husband laying down his life for his wife and treating her with respect and dignity. Could you imagine a country like that? Could you imagine a country where the kids would actually listen to their parents and do what they say? We are so far away from that as a country, but as Jesus followers, that's how we are to live. And by doing so, we are a shining example to people in our community and in our country of how we should live. Now, does this sound old-fashioned? Absolutely. Does it sound traditional? Yes, it does. It works. It works. The problems in my life when I decide to rebel and not listen to the person that's over me, or to not lay my life down for my wife, or kids to not obey and to honor your parents, for wives not to submit. When that happens, all hell breaks loose. Kids, you can't say you submit to God if you don't obey your parents. Wives, no matter what you do in church, no matter how many Bible studies you go to, no matter how much you serve God, if you don't respect your husband and submit to him, you're not submitting to God. Men, if you are critiquing and belittling your wives, talking down to them, not laying your life down for them, you're not submitting to God. If at work you're not listening to your boss and doing what they tell you to do and going around and talking bad about them behind their back, or maybe not listening to the rules and the things that the establishment at your work is, you're not submitting to God. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but that works. And what James says is when you don't submit, all these other things start happening. Chaos and confusion and lostness. And then it says this: God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. There is actually an opposition that happens when you don't do this. It's an opposition to God. We oppose God, or actually God opposes us. Could you imagine having God oppose you? It's this military term where God is standing at attention and he is in control and he is opposing you. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. I'm all for getting grace, aren't you? I'm all for grace. I don't ever want God to oppose me. Don't ever want God to oppose me. And then it says stand. It says resist the devil and he will flee from you. There is now this military term here as well. It's the same military imagery where we actually, under God's authority, are standing against Satan. We're not with Satan. We are standing against Satan, and God empowers us. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. And I'll tell you, it's important to submit to God and to humble yourself, because if you are not humble and you are proud, you are no match against Satan. Satan will spit you up, spit you out. He'll chew you up and spit you out. He is stronger than you are without God. So we don't want God opposing us and then saying, I'm going to come against the devil. No, I come underneath God, I submit to God, and I resist the devil. I stand firm in his authority, and then I'm able to resist the devil. Ephesians 5 and 6 is a great passage to read, but Ephesians 6 talks about putting on the full armor of God so that you take your stand against the devil's schemes. And then it says, draw near. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. It says draw near to God. The picture here is that God never moved. It says draw near to God. It's not that God is running after you. There was always this imagery of that God is running and chasing and running. I don't believe God just runs after you uncontrollably. I think the picture is what Jesus said when this son that decided to leave left, and God gave him, Father gave him his inheritance. That was the picture of the God, the Father gave him the inheritance. And the prodigal son left, spent it all, and then when he was at the end of himself, he came back. And he took a step onto the property. You can almost see it. He takes a step onto the property, and the father saw him from a long ways off, And what did the father do? He ran to him. Why did the father see him from a long ways? Because the father had been looking for him all the time. God is looking for you. He's not running around carelessly. God knows where he is. God hasn't moved. You have. And he is here today, and he's ready for you to take a step back. Draw near to God. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. And then it says when we come to God, what do? Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts. 4 is to cleanse your hands. Draw near, come to him, and there's a cleansing that happens. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, means there's a confession involved. I come before him and I admit before God what I've done. Sometimes with sin, this is what we do. Sometimes we cover our sin. I think we've got it up here on the screen. Sometimes this is what we do with sin. We cover it. We cover it. We cover it up as if God doesn't see it. And here's what's important. We must uncover our sin before God and just acknowledge it. It's not that God doesn't know it's there, but repentance and confession is simply acknowledging sin as God sees it and saying, God, I see this sin and I come before you right now and I uncover it before you. Because what you cover, God will uncover. What you cover, God will uncover. But what you uncover, God will cover. And he wants you to uncover it before him. And maybe even today you can come before him and just uncover that before God. Some people cover it. You know what other people do sometimes? They cherish their sin. They cherish their sin. Psalm 66:18 says, if I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. Earlier in James, it talks about the prayers that God would not hear. God doesn't hear the prayers of people that are cherishing sin. God does not want to hear the prayers of people that are cherishing sin. He wants to hear prayers of confession. If you sense that there is a separation between you and God, there might be. And so you must come before God, but you must come before God and uncover it. But don't keep that private sin there close by and say, I'm going to give you everything, God, but I'm going to keep that one. I'm going to be good with everything, God, but I'm going to keep this private one here. This private habit I'm just going to keep. It's kind of a close one that it's me, and you can have everything else. God says, no, I require it all, because only then can I be Lord. And when I'm Lord, I can give you life. If I'm not Lord, there's no way that my abundant life can flow through you. So sometimes we cover it, sometimes we cherish it. This passage says to be cleansed. Cleanse your hands, which is literally you taking an action on this. We come and we are cleansed from our sin. We confess. And then it says this, mourn. As you're confessing, there is a mourning that happens. We be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. There is a mourning. There is sometimes there's even a crying that should take place. When you see the sin and the separation that is between you and God and you and others, there should be a mourning and a weeping that occurs. This is what James says, humble yourselves. But it says here, be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Trust me, Jesus didn't walk around all the time serious. He laughed. Matter of fact, he was ridiculed for sometimes by the religious for laughing so much. He had a good time. But there were times when Jesus would mourn. And he would mourn and he would weep. He would cry over cities. He would cry over lostness. He would cry over the sin of people. And what this passage is saying is, you need to do that too. You need to mourn and weep. When was the last time you wept and mourned over a family member that was lost? When was the last time you wept and mourned over somebody in our city that was lost? We need to mourn and we need to weep. We cry for the things that God cries for. We laugh for the things that God laughs for. Sometimes we got it completely separate. And James says here, we must mourn. And then it says, lastly, humble yourselves. It comes back to this. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Over and over, go over in Scripture, all throughout. Not just in James 4:10. It says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. This is this wonderful word again of coming before the Lord, to submit to him, to worship him. And we come to him, and we thank him for not just being defined as sinners. We're no longer sinners. We are now saints. We are adopted. We come to him as sons. When the prodigal son came back to the father, you know what happened? The father threw a party for him, put a ring on his hand. All the religious didn't like it, including the older brother didn't like it. But he came back, and you know what that tells me? That you can't run so far and out-sin God. God's grace keeps coming after you. And I don't want you to leave here today and say, you know what, I think I'm going to take the pastor up on that. I think I'm just going to go out here and sin. That's not a child of God. You're just going to try to out-sin God. No. But I want to tell some of you here that think you've gone too far. No matter what you sin, God's grace, there's enough to cover it. There's enough grace. And I don't even think we have a clue of how much grace is there for us. It is so incredible. You know, I went to Niagara Falls years ago with Omar Reyes, who preached at this church. And it was a weird time. We were at a conference, and we were like, hey, let's go to Niagara Falls. Then we showed up, and we were it was just me and him. Like, there's the only male couple there, right? And everybody else, they were like getting married and having anniversaries. And then it was me and Omar. And we were looking at this waterfall, which was incredible. And it was incredible. Look at it. And as we're there, I said, what do you think, Omar? And he said, that's God's grace. That's God's grace. He said, you know what we do, Brian? We come to God with a little thimble, a little cup. And we just act like, you know, I just need this much grace for today, God. I need this much grace for God. I need you to forgive me of that sin, God. I need you to forgive me of this sin, God. And it's just like a thimble. And God is saying, you don't have a clue of my grace. If you had a clue of all my grace and my love for you, you'd stop sinning, for one. But I want you to know that if you have sinned, there is enough. And this water just reminded both of us of God's love and his grace. There are so many tons of water that falls over this every second. There is plenty of love and grace that falls over us every single day. It's God's grace that we're here right now. It's God's grace that you are here, sitting here today, that God gave you the opportunity to come back to him. As you see this waterfall right now, I want you to ask yourself, is there anything in my life where I need God's grace just to cover right now? I need God's grace. I need God to just forgive me of that. Let's don't go home and practice this. We can do that later, but why not right now? Why not right now come before God and kneel and ask for cleansing?
For from you are all things, to